There are words that do not belong in any room. Not as jokes, not as slips, not as anything that can be explained away or contextualized into something acceptable. There are words whose entire history is violence, words that were constructed specifically to dehumanize, to reduce, to communicate to a person and to everyone watching that the person does not count as fully human. And when those words land in a room, the room does not need a debate about intent or context to know what just happened. Everyone in the room already knows. They know it in their bodies before their brains have finished processing it. This is a story about one of those moments. About a word said on a game show stage that made 200 people go silent at the same exact second. About a family who had come to play a game and found themselves in the middle of something else entirely. And about a man who has been hearing that word for 57 years, who knows exactly what it does and what it is designed to do and what it costs the person it is aimed at, and who stood on that stage and made absolutely certain that what had just happened was not going to pass without being named, addressed, and answered. If you understand, without needing it explained, why that word is never acceptable and why the response to it matters, subscribe right now and hit that like button before we go any further, because we come back every week with stories that deserve their full attention, and this is one of them. Now let us talk about what happened, who was there, and what it meant. The Brooks family from Memphis, Tennessee came to Family Feud in the summer of 2024, the way all great families come to Family Feud. With history, with love, with preparation, and with the specific energy of people who have been competing with each other across kitchen tables, and at family reunions for long enough that the competitive instinct is fully formed and entirely good-natured. The team captain was 48-year-old Denise Brooks, who was a high school English teacher with 23 years in Memphis public schools, 23 years of teaching literature and language, and the specific power of words to adolescents who were in the earliest stages of understanding what words could build and what they could destroy. She was, by every account of students who found her on social media years after graduating, the teacher. The one. The one whose class you remembered not because she made it easy, but because she made it matter. She had a gift for connecting the words on a page to the lives being lived outside it, and she had spent 23 years using that gift on behalf of young people who needed to see that their lives were worth writing about and worth reading. Her husband, Calvin, 51, was a retired Memphis police officer who had served for 26 years, and who had, in those 26 years, developed a very precise and calibrated understanding of human behavior under pressure, when people were telling the truth, when they were not, and what was actually happening underneath whatever they were saying. He was quiet in the way of people who observe carefully and speak when they have something to add. He had a great deal to add. He just waited until the moment was right to add it. Their daughter, Jasmine, 24, had her mother's gift with language and her father's instinct for reading situations, and was 2 years into a master's program in communications, where she was writing a thesis about how media shapes public understanding of race in America. She was the kind of 24-year-old who has already done more thinking about the things most adults take for granted than most adults ever will, and she carried that thinking lightly, not as a performance of her own intellectual work, but as a natural extension of who she was. Their son, Devin, 20, was in his second year at the University of Memphis studying business, with the easy, competitive confidence of a young man who grew up in a house with 2 driven parents and 1 driven older sister, and has been keeping up with all of them, one way or another, his entire life. The 5th team member was Denise's mother, 72-year-old Patricia, called Grandma Pat by everyone who knew her, called Grandma Pat within approximately 45 seconds by Steve Harvey, and a woman who had grown up in Memphis in the 1950s and 1960s, and who therefore had a relationship with the word that was about to be said in that studio that was not abstract, not historical, not theoretical. It was personal in the specific way that things are personal when they happen to you and to the people you loved in real time, in the city you were born in, and you remember all of it. They had applied to Family Feud because Devin had entered them on a dare from a friend, and because Denise had decided, when the selection call came, that it was exactly the kind of unexpected thing that families needed sometimes, the adventure of doing something together that was not in the usual rotation. They had prepared thoroughly and with obvious enjoyment. Grandma Pat had made it clear from the beginning that she intended to be the best player on the team, and had spent 6 weeks proving it in the practice sessions with an accuracy and a speed that Devin described, with absolute sincerity, as terrifying. She was in excellent health, physically quick, mentally precise, and entirely uninterested in anyone's assumption that a 72-year-old woman might need extra time to think. The competing family was the Holt family from a suburb of Louisville, Kentucky. 5 of them, 2 brothers, a sister, and 2 spouses, who had the easy, bonded energy of a family who genuinely liked being together and had clearly been looking forward to this for a long time. The team captain was 33-year-old Brett Holt, who worked in sales and had the natural, uninhibited social confidence of someone who had never had a door fail to open for him, and had concluded from this that all doors were openable. He was funny in the broad, high-energy way of someone who had spent a lifetime getting rooms to respond to him, and the room responded. His brother Kyle, 29, was quick and enthusiastic. His sister Amanda, 31, was sharp and focused. The spouses were warm and participated with the cheerful competitiveness of people who had been brought into a family game dynamic and had decided to take it as seriously as the people who were born into it. The Holts were, on first impression, and for the majority of what followed, exactly the kind of opposing family that makes a good episode of television, competitive enough to make it interesting, warm enough to make it fun. Brett Holt was the problem, not all of Brett Holt. Not Brett Holt in every moment. A specific part of Brett Holt that had been brought along to that studio without, apparently, being thought through. The part that lived in whatever spaces he occupied when he was not at his most deliberate. The part that had absorbed things over years, and kept them without examining them, and carried them into rooms the way people carry things they have never unpacked, because unpacking would require looking at the contents. He was not, in the ordinary meaning of the word, a malicious person. He was someone who had got to 33 without developing certain necessary habits of self-examination, and that gap on a Tuesday afternoon in a television studio was going to have consequences he had not prepared for. The first 2 rounds went well. Both families played hard and the scores were close. The audience was engaged. Steve Harvey was in excellent form, working between the 2 families with the warmth and the speed of a host who knows how to keep the energy exactly where it needs to be. Grandma Pat had already become the audience's favorite within the first 10 minutes, giving her answers with a decisive certainty that made the people around her visibly joyful. Devin was quick. Jasmine was accurate. Calvin was steady. Denise was exactly what 23 years of teaching language had produced: precise, fluent, fast. During the transition between the second and third rounds, with the energy in the studio high and the score close, Brett Holt said it. He was in conversation with his brother Kyle about one of the recent answers. It had been a good answer, a clever, unexpected answer that the survey had confirmed as one of the top responses, and both families had reacted to it with the shared appreciation that comes when someone in a competition does something genuinely impressive. Brett was saying something to Kyle about how you had to give it to them. He gestured toward the Brooks family, and in the middle of that sentence, in the specific place where a descriptor was needed, he used the word, not shouted, not spat. Said in the conversational register of someone reaching for the nearest available language without thinking about where that language came from or what it carried with it. He used it the way people use words they have used before without consequence, in places where no one corrected them or looked at them differently for it. He had never been in a place quite like this one. The ambient microphones on the Family Feud set were designed to capture exactly this kind of thing, and they captured it with complete clarity. The production team heard it immediately. 3 rows of the studio audience heard it and went still in the simultaneous, physical way that rooms go still when something sharp arrives unexpectedly. Devin heard it and turned his head toward the Holt podium with the controlled, deliberate turn of a 20-year-old who has been raised by a police officer father and an English teacher mother to know exactly what it costs to react in a certain way, and who is making the decision, in real time, not to. Jasmine heard it and closed her eyes for 1 second. Calvin heard it and did not move and did not change his expression, and looked at the floor in front of him with the look of a man who has spent 26 years absorbing things without reacting because his job required it, and who is still running that protocol on pure muscle memory in a situation where he did not need to. Denise heard it and looked at her mother. Grandma Pat heard it. She heard it the way a 72-year-old woman who grew up in Memphis in the 1950s and 1960s hears that word, not as a new event, but as a recurring one, the latest in a very long series, the word arriving again in a room that it had no business being in, exactly the same word it had always been, carrying exactly the same history, doing exactly the same thing to the air and the room and the people it landed near. She looked at no one. She looked straight ahead. Her hands, which had been resting on the podium in front of her, did not move. She breathed once. She stayed exactly where she was. Steve Harvey had heard it. He was standing close enough to the Holt podium that the only question was not whether he had heard it, but what he was going to do next. And what he was going to do next was visible in his face before he had fully turned, visible in the way his body changed, the way the ease and warmth of the previous 2 rounds drained out of his posture, and was replaced by something that was not anger in the hot sense, but was anger in the older, more permanent sense. The anger of someone who has spent 57 years living in a body that word was invented to demean, and who is standing in a room where it has just been used again, and who is done in this moment and in this room with allowing it to be treated as anything other than exactly what it is. He walked toward the center of the stage. Not slowly, not dramatically, with the direct, purposeful stride of someone who knows exactly where they are going and why. "Stop," he said. The word landed with the specific weight of a word said by someone who means it completely, who has decided it, who is not presenting it as a suggestion or a request. The room stopped. Steve turned to face the production team. "Cut the game," he said. "We're not going further right now." He turned to face Brett Holt directly. "I need to tell you what just happened," Steve said. His voice was completely even. It was the voice of a man who has made a decision about how this conversation is going to go and has full control of the temperature. "You just used a word. I heard it. My crew heard it. The people in this audience heard it. And that family standing over there." He did not gesture, he did not point. He held Brett Holt's gaze and let the implication carry. "Heard it. And I am not going to stand here and pretend that I didn't, and I am not going to go back to this game until I say what I am about to say." Brett Holt's face had gone through several rapid transitions. The easy confidence was gone. What was in its place was the expression of someone who has been caught not performing remorse, not calculating a response, simply caught, in the specific way that people are caught when they did not believe they were going to be, when the room they thought they understood turned out to be a different room. "That word," Steve said, "is not a word that belongs in this building. It does not belong anywhere, but it especially does not belong here in this room in front of this family." He paused. "I want to explain something to you, because I think explanation might be more useful right now than just telling you to leave, which is what I could do and what a part of me wants to do." The studio was silent in the way it gets silent when the air itself has been changed. "That word was designed," Steve said. "It was not an accident of language. It was not slang that developed naturally and happened to pick up negative connotations over time. It was designed, specifically and deliberately, as a tool for communicating to black people that they were subhuman, that they did not count, that they were not full people. It was used with that intent in this country for centuries. It was used in the streets of Memphis," he paused on the city, "where that family comes from, for a very specific portion of American history that was not very long ago, and that a 72-year-old woman standing on this stage lived through." He looked at Grandma Pat for one moment, then back at Brett. "So when you reach for that word, regardless of why, regardless of what you meant by it, regardless of how it lives in whatever context you picked it up in, you are reaching for all of that. You are picking up that entire history every single time you use it, and I need you to understand that." Brett Holt said something. He said it was just a word. He said he didn't mean it the way it sounded. He said he wasn't racist. Steve Harvey let him finish. He did not interrupt. He waited until the sentence was done, and then he said something that became, in the weeks following the broadcast, the sentence most associated with the episode. "You don't get to decide what that word means," Steve said. "The people it was designed to hurt get to decide what it means, and they have told you clearly and for a very long time what it means to them. The only question is whether you've been listening." He looked at Brett for a long moment. Then he said, "I'm going to ask you to leave the stage, not because I think you are a bad person. I don't know you. But I know that word, and I know what it does, and I know that the people standing across from you deserve to be in a room where it hasn't just been said at them. So I'm going to ask you to step off." Brett Holt left the stage. His family visibly shaken, his wife touching her face in the specific way of someone absorbing something that requires processing, his sister Amanda looking at the floor with an expression that said she was not entirely surprised and was going to be thinking about that for a while, reorganized. They were 4 instead of 5. The show would handle the mechanics. The mechanics were not what mattered. Steve turned to the Brooks family. He walked across the stage toward them with the deliberate care of someone who is moving from one kind of energy into another and wants to make the transition right. He stood in front of them. He looked at Calvin, who had still not moved and whose face was still entirely composed. He looked at Denise, whose eyes were bright in the specific way of a person holding something that has weight. He looked at Devin and at Jasmine and at Grandma Pat. He said to all of them quietly, "I'm sorry that happened here." Grandma Pat looked at him. She was 72 years old and she had grown up in Memphis in the 1950s, and she had heard that word before in contexts that made a game show stage look like a soft version of the world. She looked at Steve Harvey with the eyes of someone who has been absorbing the weight of something for a very long time and who is choosing, in this moment, what she is going to do with it. Then she said something that the production team and the studio audience and eventually millions of viewers would carry with them long after the episode itself. She said, "Baby, I've been hearing that word since before your parents were born. I didn't come here today to let it win. I came here to play Family Feud, so let's play." Steve Harvey looked at her for a long moment. Something moved across his face that was beyond any of the usual expressions, not composure, not warmth, not professionalism. It was something more personal. The expression of a man who has just watched a 72-year-old woman from Memphis deliver, in 2 sentences, the entire argument against allowing that word to have the final say in any room. He nodded once. He straightened. He turned to the audience and said, in a voice that carried everything the moment required, "That woman right there, that is the whole thing." The Brooks family played the rest of the game with Grandma Pat as the beating heart of everything. She was magnificent. She had always been going to be magnificent. 6 weeks of practice, 72 years of watching human beings, a lifetime of understanding exactly what people wanted and feared and reached for, but she was magnificent in a way that had an extra dimension now. The dimension of a person who has just been told, in the ugliest possible language, that she did not count, and who has decided to answer that message not with anger but with extraordinary, precise, joyful competence. She gave answers with the snap and certainty of someone who is not playing a game show anymore but is making a statement, and the statement is, "I am here. I am exactly as sharp as I have always been. Nothing that was just said to me changes a single thing about what I can do." Devin played with his sister's analytical focus and his father's controlled intensity. Jasmine played with the specific quality of someone who has spent 2 years of graduate study thinking about exactly the kind of moment they are now standing inside. Calvin played with the quiet, accurate reliability of a man who has spent 26 years making good decisions under pressure without any audience. Denise played the way an English teacher plays when language is being used well by the people she loves, with visible pride and quiet, complete attentiveness. They won the main game. They went to fast money. Devin went first and scored 121 points. Grandma Pat went second. She walked to the fast money podium in the measured way she walked everywhere, the unhurried pace of a woman who has never been in a hurry because she has always known where she was going. She stood at the microphone and looked at the clock that would appear above her and looked at Steve Harvey and said one word, "Ready." He hit the button. Grandma Pat answered all 5 questions before the 15-second mark. 4 of her 5 answers were in the top 2 survey responses. Her 5th answer was the #1 response, by the largest margin the board had shown all day. The Brooks family's combined total was 294 points. They had won $20,000. The audience gave them the kind of response that is less about a game show and more about a room processing something together and releasing it together. The sustained, warm, full-body response of people who have been on a journey that afternoon and have arrived somewhere that feels, if not like a resolution, then at least like a moment of right things winning. Steve Harvey stood beside Grandma Pat while the check was produced. He held it with both hands and looked at her and said, "How do you feel?" Grandma Pat looked at the check, then at her family, then at Steve Harvey with the expression of a woman who has decided to tell the simple truth. "I feel just fine," she said. "I told you I didn't come here for that word, I came here for this." She held up the check. "This is mine." The audience responded and kept responding. Steve Harvey laughed the way he laughs when someone says the exact right thing from somewhere deep in him, with his whole face, with the specific delight of a man who is genuinely surprised and completely charmed by the person in front of him. The episode aired 5 weeks later. The clip of Steve's response to Brett, specifically the sentence about who gets to decide what that word means, was shared hundreds of thousands of times within 24 hours of the broadcast, not as outrage content, as something else, as a demonstration of what it looks like when someone with a platform says a true and necessary thing clearly, without hedging it, without balancing it against the comfort of the person it was addressed to, and without leaving any room for the argument that it was complicated or debatable. The specificity of it, the history, the design, the explicit naming of Memphis, and what that city represented in American history, was noted by educators, by historians, by people who work in civil rights and racial justice contexts. Several wrote that they had rarely heard the mechanism of that specific word explained so precisely and so accessibly in an unrehearsed public setting, that Steve Harvey had done in 60 seconds what textbooks spent chapters attempting. Jasmine Brooks, the graduate student writing her thesis on media and race, wrote about the episode as a case study. She submitted a version of the section to an academic journal. It was accepted. The section was about the specific dynamic of naming, about what happens when a word that depends for its power on the room's collective decision to treat it as somehow unspeakable is instead named directly, its history stated plainly, its design explained as design rather than accident. She argued that Steve Harvey's response had been unusual not for its emotional content but for its precision, for the specific choice to explain rather than simply to condemn, to identify the mechanism rather than just the outcome. She wrote that precision in those moments was its own form of resistance. Her thesis committee asked her to expand the section. She did. It became the heart of the work. Calvin Brooks, who had not moved or changed his expression in the minute and a half between hearing the word and Steve Harvey finishing his address, gave exactly one interview about the taping to a Memphis television news program 2 months after the episode aired. He was asked how he had held himself together so completely in the moment the word was used. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said that he had spent 26 years as a police officer in Memphis, and that in 26 years there had been a great many moments that required him to hold himself together, and that he had developed, out of necessity, a very strong capacity for it. He said that capacity had come at a cost that he was not going to describe on television. He said that watching his mother-in-law respond the way she responded, watching Grandma Pat receive what had been said and decide in front of everyone that she was not going to let it own the afternoon, had made him feel something that 26 years of training had not fully prepared him for. He said the word he would use for it was proud. He said it was not a large enough word. He said he did not have a larger one available. Grandma Pat used part of the prize money to fund a trip to visit her oldest friend, a woman she had grown up with in Memphis who had moved to Atlanta in 1971 and who Grandma Pat had been planning to visit for 3 years while other things kept coming up. She went in August. She stayed a week. She took Jasmine with her. They drove because Grandma Pat preferred driving when the distance was manageable, which she defined as anything under 8 hours. Jasmine drove. Grandma Pat navigated using a combination of an app she did not fully trust and her own memory of roads she had driven before, which proved more reliable than the app in at least 3 instances. They arrived. The 2 old friends sat on a porch in Atlanta and talked for 4 hours while Jasmine sat nearby and listened to 2 women who had grown up in Memphis in the 1950s and who were still here, still talking, still sharp, still laughing at things that nobody else in the vicinity fully understood. But that did not require any outside understanding because they were for each other and had always been for each other and always would be. Denise went back to Memphis and went back to school and went back to teaching her students about language, about its history, about its power, about the specific words that carry specific things and what you take on when you pick them up and what you put down when you choose differently. She told her students about the episode, in the context of a unit about word history and connotation, and the difference between denotation and the full weight of what a word actually does when it lands. She showed them, with the school's permission and the family's explicit approval, the clip of Steve Harvey's explanation. She said that as a teacher of language, she had rarely heard the history and design of that specific word explained so completely in so little time. She said she was going to use it for years. She said her students listened in the specific way that students listen when they are hearing something that is connecting something they already felt to something they can now understand. She said that was the whole point of teaching language. That was the whole reason she had spent 23 years doing it. Brett Holt made a statement through a social media account that had previously been mostly photographs of his family's life, about 3 weeks after the episode aired. The statement was not long. It said that he had used a word he should not have used in a place he definitely should not have used it, in front of people who deserved better, and that the conversation that followed had required him to look at things he had been avoiding looking at for a long time. He said he was working on it. He did not explain what that work looked like or make any claims about its completeness. He did not ask for any particular response. The statement received a range of reactions from the people who saw it, from skepticism to cautious acknowledgement to the specific, measured response of people who have been hurt by versions of that word, and who know that the distance between a social media statement and actual changed behavior is a distance that only time and the people closest to Brett Holt could accurately measure. Denise Brooks, when asked if she had seen the statement, said she had, and that she hoped it was the beginning of something, and that she had no further comment to make about it, and that this was the entirety of what she owed the question. There is a version of this story that is about one bad word on one afternoon in one television studio, and that version is true, but it is not large enough. The larger version is about something that the Brooks family had been navigating, in various forms, for their entire lives in this country. About what it costs to live in a body that a specific word was invented to demean, and to do it with the grace that Calvin demonstrated, and the composure that Denise maintained, and the focused joy that Grandma Pat brought to 5 survey questions in a fast money round. The larger version is about what it means that a 72-year-old woman from Memphis can hear that word in a room and decide, in 2 seconds and out loud, that the word is not the point, and that she is not going to let it be the point, because she came here for something else and she is going to get it. The larger version is about the specific, practiced, daily, ongoing work of refusing to be defined by the worst thing anyone has ever said to you or about you, and doing that work with the kind of grace that makes everyone watching it feel, for a moment, that they understand something they did not fully understand before. Grandma Pat went home to Memphis and sat in her chair and was exactly who she had always been. She had won $20,000 and she had said the word did not come here to win and she had made sure it didn't. She went back to her life. She continued to be the best player at any game she played. She continues to be. She has always been. If this story reached you, if it made you think about the history of certain words and what we decide to do with them, or if Grandma Pat's response moved something in you that needed moving, share this today with someone who needs to see what it looks like to refuse to let a word on an afternoon. Leave a comment below and tell us what part of this story stayed with you, because this community reads those comments and shows up for each other, and your voice here matters. And if you are not already with us, subscribe right now, because every single week we come back with stories exactly like this one. Stories about the people who absorb things that should never have been aimed at them and who refuse, again and again, to let those things be the last word. Stories about what it looks like when someone says, "Not in this room, not today, not ever." And stories about 72-year-old women from Memphis who come to win and leave with everything they came for. We will see you in the next one.